The silence in the castle was a living thing, a creature Kale had cultivated over centuries. It was a silence of power, woven from the stone of the walls and the weight of his own immortal stillness. It coiled in the long, shadowed hallways, pooled in the cavernous throne room, and lay like a shroud over the velvet draperies of his chambers. For 6 months, another sound had dared to exist within it, the soft human beat of Elena's heart. It was a rhythm he had come to crave with a ferocity that unsettled him, a frantic, fragile tempo that underscored the glacial calm of his own existence. Their nights were a conflagration, a desperate clash of heat and shadow where the silence was broken by whispered words and the rasp of breath. In the darkness, pressed against the cool silk of the sheets, she was his. Her warmth was a brand, her scent of lavender and rain-soaked earth an intoxicating poison. He would trace the mortal blush on her skin, marveling at the intricate web of veins beneath, the delicate architecture of a life so fleeting it was almost an insult to his permanence. In those hours, he allowed himself a sliver of something he refused to name, a possessiveness that went beyond the physical. But when the dawn bled through the high-arched windows, painting the stone floors in hues of rose and gray, the silence would reclaim its throne. The king would reassert himself over the lover. He would rise, dress in the severe black and silver of his station, and the distance would return, a chasm wide and deep between his ancient, unyielding world and her vibrant, transient one. He would see her watching him from the bed, her dark eyes wide and unreadable, and he would offer her a kingdom's worth of jewels, silks, and comfort, but never the one thing she seemed to search for in his gaze. He did not have the words for it, or perhaps he had simply forgotten them long ago. Today, the silence felt different. It was heavier, laced with an anxiety that was not his own. Elena had been quiet for 3 weeks now, a new kind of quiet that was distinct from her usual contemplative nature. It was a brittle, watchful stillness. She moved through the castle like a ghost. Her smiles for the staff were strained, and at night, when he held her, her body was a taut wire of unspoken tension. He had attributed it to the suffocating opulence of court life, the relentless pressure of being the human consort to a vampire monarch. He had thought time and gifts would soothe it. He had been wrong. He had come to her private study seeking a book of human poetry she'd been reading, something about a Grecian urn. He found the mundane act of searching her space oddly grounding, a way to touch her life without touching her. The room was a testament to her presence, a half-empty glass of water on the small desk, a silken shawl draped over a chair, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the air. He moved with an unnatural grace, his steps making no sound on the thick carpet. He checked the bookshelf, the small cabinet, and then his eyes fell on something glinting on the floor near her desk, a small brass key, dropped and forgotten. It was ornate, old-fashioned, not one of the castle's standard keys. His gaze traveled to the locked drawer of her writing desk. A flicker of cold, possessive curiosity stirred within him. He knew he shouldn't. This was her private space. But the weight of her recent silence, the tension that had infected their nights, drove him forward. He picked up the key. It fit the lock perfectly. Inside the drawer, nestled on a bed of faded blue satin, was a stack of letters, tied with a simple white ribbon. The paper was thick, creamy, expensive. Her script, a fluid, elegant cursive he recognized from the notes she sometimes left for her staff, covered the pages. He lifted the top envelope. There was no address, no recipient's name. He slid the letter from its sheath. The paper was cool against his fingertips, yet it seemed to burn him. His gaze fell on the first 2 words, and the ancient, placid silence of his world shattered into a million screaming pieces. Dear baby. The words were a physical blow. He felt his non-beating heart lurch, a painful clench of muscle deep in his chest. Baby. He read the line again, his mind refusing to process the implication. He scanned the page, his eyes devouring the words with a desperate hunger. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. I don't know if you can hear me yet. The midwife's book says, "You're no bigger than a raspberry, a little secret I carry inside me, a secret of impossible joy and suffocating terror. I confirmed it yesterday when my monthly bleeding didn't come for the 2nd time. I look at the moon from my window, the same cold silver moon that watches over your father, and I wonder if you will have his eyes. I hope so. They are the most beautiful, storm-gray things I have ever seen. I also hope you do not inherit his heart, because I am not sure he has one." Kale's breath hitched. He sank into her desk chair, the letter trembling in his hand. A child, his child. A life was growing inside her, a life that was half of him, half of her. A dizzying, terrifying wave of something akin to joy crested within him, so potent it stole his breath. An heir, a son or daughter. His line, which he had thought would end with him, would continue. But the wave crashed, breaking against the rocks of her next words, and the joy was swept away by a cold, black tide of dread. I have to protect you. That is my only duty now. I tried to talk to him about children 2 months ago, before I even suspected you existed. I asked him what kind of father he would want to be. He looked at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign tongue and said, "The question is irrelevant. I would be the father. A royal child requires a teacher of duty, strategy, and strength. Sentiment is a luxury the throne cannot afford." I felt something die in my chest that day. Then last month, I tried again, more carefully. "Kale, if we had children, would you want them to choose their own path?" He was reviewing a treaty with the wolf clans, barely looking up. "A royal child's path is chosen before birth. That is the price of power. You know this, Elena." His voice was so dismissive, so final. I never asked again. He speaks of heirs as he speaks of treaties as assets, as tools to forge alliances, as pawns to be moved on a political board. He would see you as a prince or princess of the blood court, a symbol of power, another jewel in his crown. He would never see you as just you. My baby. So I have to make a choice. I will love him from afar, but I will love you from up close. I will keep you safe, even if it means he can never know you exist. He grabbed the ribbon and tore it, the small sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, ringing void. He fumbled through the stack. 6 letters in total, one written roughly every week, each one a chronicle of her growing love for their unborn child and her deepening fear of him, each one a meticulously documented step in her plan to escape. A letter from 2 weeks ago. "I have a plan now. My maid, Teresa, the older woman who served my mother before she died, she is the only one who knows. She has been taking the smaller jewels to a human jeweler in the lower city, pieces you gave me before we were together that you won't remember or miss. We melt them down first so they can't be traced. It is a small fortune now, enough to buy passage on a ship, enough to find us a small, quiet cottage by a sea you would never think to look for us near. I also found a witch in the lower city, a kind woman who gave me a concealment charm. She says it will hide your heartbeat from vampire senses, mask you in my own rhythms. It's why your father hasn't noticed you yet. The charm cost almost everything I had left from my old life, but it was worth it. You are hidden, little one. Safe. A letter from 10 days ago. I tried one more time. I had to. I made myself ask him directly at dinner last night, my heart pounding so hard I thought he would hear it over the sound of the music. "Kale, what would make you happy about having a child?" He set down his wine and looked at me with those beautiful, empty eyes. "An heir would secure the dynasty. A daughter could be married to the northern clan's eldest son, ending a century of border disputes. A son could be trained to lead the eastern territories. Either would be satisfactory." Satisfactory. That was the word he used, not joy, not love. Satisfactory. I excused myself and vomited in my chamber. I don't know if it was you making me sick or the horror of what he'd said. I think it was both. I can't let you become satisfactory to him. I can't let you be reduced to a treaty solution. A letter from 1 week ago. Teresa finished the last sale today. The money is sewn into the hem of my traveling cloak, hidden in the back of my armoire behind the winter furs. My bag is packed with simple clothes, nothing that would identify me as his consort. I have a contact in the port city of Marisol, a distant cousin of Teresa's who can secure passage on a merchant vessel heading south. 3 more weeks. That's all I need. 3 more weeks until the concealment charm's magic fades and you become detectable to vampire senses. The witch warned me it only works through the first trimester. After that, your heartbeat will be audible to him. Your scent will change enough for him to notice. 3 more weeks and then we run. And the last one, written just 2 days ago, the ink still smelling faintly of lavender. The time is almost here, my love. 2 more weeks. I can feel you now. Tiny flutters like butterfly wings in my belly. Yesterday your father held me, his hand resting on my stomach, and I held my breath in terror, but the charm held. You stayed hidden. He traced my skin with his cool fingers, so gentle it made me ache, and for one foolish, dangerous moment I imagined telling him. I imagined his face softening, imagined him pressing his ear to my belly to listen for you, imagined him being happy. But then he spoke. We were lying in the darkness, and he said, almost to himself, "The Northern Clan's ambassador arrives next month. If we are to secure a permanent peace, a marriage alliance would be the strongest seal." His hand was still on my stomach where you lay sleeping. He was already planning your future, planning to trade you like a commodity, and he didn't even know you existed. The hope died. It always dies with him. Every time I let myself believe he might be different, he shows me exactly who he is. So we must go. Forgive me for taking you away from him, my love. But your father doesn't know how to love anything more than his crown. I will teach you to love everything, the rain, the stars, the feeling of grass under your feet, the sound of laughter. I will give you a small life, but it will be a life full of warmth. That is worth more than all the kingdoms in the world. The letter slipped from his numb fingers. Your father doesn't know how to love. The phrase was a refrain, a damning chorus running through every page. It was the epitaph of their relationship. She had tried. She had asked him, again and again, in different ways, giving him chance after chance to show her a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. And every time, every single time, he had answered with the cold calculations of a king. He had dismissed her questions. He had used words like irrelevant and satisfactory. He had spoken of their unborn child, a child he hadn't even known existed as a treaty solution, while his hand rested on the very place where that child grew. The devastation was absolute. It was a hollowing out, a scooping of his insides until all that was left was a fragile, aching shell. The anger he might have felt was impossible. How could he be angry when she had tried so hard, so desperately, to reach him? When she had extended her hand again and again only to have him turn away, wrapped in his robes of duty and power? She didn't trust him. After all this time, after everything he felt for her, this fierce, unspoken, possessive thing he had mistaken for love, she looked at him and saw not a partner, but a threat. A monster from whom she had to protect their child, and she was right to see him that way. He had held her in his arms, possessed her body, and he had never once truly touched her soul. He had given her a world of luxury and left her in an emotional desert, so barren and terrifying that she would choose to run into the unknown rather than risk staying with him. He looked around the beautiful, quiet study, at the evidence of her life interwoven with his, and saw it for what it was, a gilded cage. He had built it for her, piece by gleaming, cold piece. He had locked the door himself with his silence, his distance, his careless, cruel words about duty and lineage. The realization was a shard of ice in his gut. This was not her betrayal, it was his. He had failed her so completely, so catastrophically, that she believed the only safe place for their child was a world without him in it. He bowed his head, the weight of 1,000 years of solitude pressing down on him, and for the first time since he was a frightened, mortal boy, Kale, the vampire king, felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. He remained in the chair for a long time, the scattered letters like fallen white leaves on the desk before him. The light in the room shifted, the soft afternoon gold deepening into the bruised purple of twilight. He didn't move. He simply reread the words, letting them flay him, strip away the layers of pride and power until only the raw, wounded core of him was left. Each sentence was a fresh indictment. Each of her desperate attempts to reach him, documented in her own hand, was a mirror showing him the man he had become, cold, unyielding, a king before all else. He saw the faint, terrifying echo of his own father. His father, the previous king, had been a master of emotional austerity. Love, in his court, was a currency to be exchanged for loyalty. Children were bloodlines, not sons and daughters. Kale remembered his own childhood as a series of lessons in statecraft, his worth measured not in hugs or praise, but in his mastery of swordplay, his understanding of political maneuvering, his ability to suppress all sentiment. He remembered standing before his father after his first successful negotiation with a rival clan, his chest puffed with pride at age 12, only to be told, "Your usefulness is confirmed. Do not become complacent. Sentiment will destroy everything we've built." When Kale had asked, just once, if his father was proud of him, The old king had looked at him with ice in his eyes and said, "Pride is what a father feels for a son. Satisfaction is what a king feels for an heir. Learn the difference." There had been no warmth, no affection, only the cold assessment of an asset. He had sworn he would be a stronger king, a more formidable ruler. He had never considered he might become the same kind of father. Elena's letters forced him to see the truth. In his effort to build an unbreachable fortress around his kingdom and his heart, he had imprisoned the one person who had ever managed to breach its walls. He had treated her like a precious acquisition, a beautiful human jewel to adorn his court, and had been shocked when the jewel revealed it had a heart and a mind of its own, a will strong enough to defy him. Worse, he had answered every question she asked, every gentle probe for his humanity, with his father's voice. Irrelevant, satisfactory. The price of power. He was his father, wearing a different crown. He heard the soft click of the study door opening. His head snapped up. Elena stood, silhouetted against the candlelit hallway, her form slender and graceful. Though he could see now, with his new awareness, the subtle changes, the slight fullness in her face, the way she moved her hand protectively to her lower belly as she walked. How had he been so blind? She carried a small tray with a single cup of chamomile tea, a nightly ritual she had adopted. Her face, usually so open and expressive, was clouded with a weariness that cut him to the quick. She hadn't seen him yet in the dim study. She placed the tray on a small side table, her movements fluid and quiet. "Kale?" she called softly, her voice uncertain. She had expected the room to be empty. He rose from the chair, his joints protesting the long stillness. He moved from behind the desk into the soft glow of the room's lamps. The letters were still scattered before him, the drawer hanging open. Her eyes followed his movement, and then dropped. She saw the open drawer. She saw the scattered pages. The color drained from her face. The teacup she was about to lift slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stone floor. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet room. Her breath hitched, a sharp, terrified gasp. Her hand flew to her stomach, a gesture so instinctive, so fiercely protective, it was like a blade twisting in his chest. In that one small movement, he saw everything her letters had described, the mother lioness shielding her cub from the predator. And the predator was him. Her eyes, wide with panic, flew to his. He saw the frantic calculation in them, the escape plan in ruins, the confrontation she had dreaded for weeks now upon her. She was measuring distances to the door, calculating if she could run, if she could get to Teresa, if she could flee tonight instead of in 2 weeks. He expected her to crumble, to weep. She did neither. Her chin lifted, her spine straightened. The fear was still there, a wild animal in her eyes, but it was caged by a sudden, steely resolve. If she could not run, she would fight. "So, you know," she said. Her voice was not a whisper, but a low, steady tremor. It was the bravest sound he had ever heard. He wanted to rage. He wanted to roar his hurt, his fury at her secrecy. The ancient, territorial part of him screamed at the thought of her planning to steal his child, his heir, but one look at her defiant, terrified face, her hand shielding their baby, and the rage died before it could be born. It was replaced by a vast, aching emptiness. Anger was a privilege he had not earned. He took a step toward her, and she flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that felt like a physical blow. He froze. He held up his hands, palms open, a gesture of surrender that felt foreign and clumsy. "Elena," he began, and was horrified by the raw, ragged sound of his own voice. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the regal authority that had defined him for a millennium. It would not come. Why? The question was not an accusation. It was a plea. A genuine, desperate request for understanding. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his for a trap. When she found none, only a raw, unguarded pain that mirrored her own. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Why?" she repeated, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. "You have to ask why. Kyle, I tried to talk to you. Do you remember? 2 months ago, I asked you what kind of father you would want to be. You looked at me like I was wasting your time and said sentiment was a luxury the throne couldn't afford. I asked you if our children could choose their own paths. You didn't even look up from your papers. You said a royal child's path is chosen before birth and that I should know this." Your voice. Her own voice broke. Your voice was so cold, Kale. Like I was a servant asking a stupid question. She took a shaky breath, her hand pressing harder against her stomach. And then at dinner last week, I asked you directly, what would make you happy about having a child? Do you remember what you said? He did. The memory rose like bile in his throat. He had called an heir satisfactory. He had spoken of marriage alliances while she sat across from him, already carrying his child, already planning her escape. You said a daughter could be married to the north, a son could lead the east. You said either would be satisfactory. Her voice was venomous now, thick with hurt. I am carrying your child, and you had already decided to trade them away. You speak of heirs as you speak of treaties as assets, as tools to forge alliances, as pawns to be moved on a political board. And last week, 2 nights ago, you held me with your hand on my stomach and spoke about marriage alliances being the strongest seal. You were lying in bed with your child between us, planning their political future, and you didn't even know they existed. She was shaking now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I will not have my child be a seal on a pact. I will not have them raised to believe their only worth is in who they can be married off to. I will not have their heart be a casualty of your politics. I would rather they have nothing and be loved than have a kingdom and be used. Every word was true. Every word was a stone she threw at him, and he could not deflect a single one. He had said those things, he had believed them. He had seen the world in terms of power, strategy, and advantage for so long that he had forgotten any other language existed. He had tried to teach her that language, and instead, she had shown him the poverty of his own vocabulary. Worse, she had tried to teach him her language, the language of love, of choice, of seeing people as people, and he had rejected every lesson with cold dismissals and royal condescension. I was wrong, he said. The admission felt like tearing out a part of himself. Kings were never wrong. But he was not just a king anymore. He was the man who had terrified this woman, the father this child was being hidden from. Elena, I was a fool. You were a king, she corrected, her voice sharp with pain. And your kingdom will always come first. I understand that. It is why I have to leave. To protect the one thing that must come first for me. No, he said, taking another slow, deliberate step. She tensed, but didn't flinch this time. She just watched him, her body coiled and ready. You are my kingdom, Elena. I have been the worst kind of blind. I saw you, but I did not see you. I heard you, but I did not listen. You asked me questions, again and again, and I dismissed every one of them. You tried to reach me, and I turned away every time. I possessed your time, your body, but I never made a home for your heart, and that is the greatest failure of my entire existence. He gestured to the letters on the desk. These pages. They are the testament to that failure. You wrote to our child because you could not speak to me. You built a world of secrets because I made the truth too dangerous to voice. You asked me what kind of father I would be, and I gave you the answer that sent you running. Every cold word, every dismissal, every time I chose the king over the man, I built this cage around you. And then I was shocked when you tried to escape it. He finally reached her, stopping just out of arm's length. He looked down at her hand, still pressed against her womb, a fragile shield against a world of threats he had created. He wanted to cover her hand with his own, to feel the life he had almost lost, but he knew he had no right. Not yet. Don't run from me, he whispered. And the plea was stripped of all pride, all artifice. It was the voice of a man on the edge of a precipice. Please, give me a chance to be the man you deserve. The father our baby deserves. Let me prove you wrong. Let me show you that I can be different than what I've been. I know I have no right to ask. I know I have given you every reason to leave, but I am asking anyway. Elena stared at him, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She saw no king in front of her. The crown was invisible, the power held in abeyance. She saw only a man laid bare, his stormy gray eyes swimming with a desperate, unfamiliar vulnerability. It was the first crack in the marble facade, the first glimmer of a heart she had thought was made of stone. Hope, that foolish, dangerous thing, began to beat its tiny wings against the cage of her ribs. It was a fragile, terrifying thing, but for the first time in weeks, it was there. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Every time I tried, you shut me out. Every time I looked for the man beneath the king, you showed me only the crown." "I know," he said, and his voice was thick with anguish. "I know. And I cannot undo those moments, but I can promise you that I see them now. I see every time I failed you, and I am asking, begging for the chance to do better, not for me, for them." His eyes dropped to where her hand protected their child. "For our baby. They deserve a father who loves them, not one who sees them as a political tool. And you deserve a partner, not a king who treats you like a beautiful ornament. I want to be those things. I want to try." She didn't answer him with words. She simply lowered her hand from her stomach, a silent, tentative offering of truce. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. But it was a beginning. It was a single, fragile thread thrown across the chasm between them, and he seized it like a drowning man grasping a rope. The days that followed were a study in tension and tentative grace. The shattered teacup was cleared away, but the ghost of its breaking remained, a symbol of the fragile ground on which they now stood. Kale did not press her. He did not demand forgiveness or try to erase the past with grand, empty gestures. He understood, with a clarity that was both new and painful, that trust was not a fortress to be taken by storm, but a garden to be cultivated with patience and care, and his own garden was a wasteland. His first act was to give her space. He moved his personal effects to an adjoining chamber, leaving her the master suite that had been theirs. It was a small, symbolic act, but it spoke volumes. He was no longer assuming his right to her space, her body. He was waiting for an invitation. At night, he would stand on his balcony, which overlooked hers, and simply watch her silhouette as she read by candlelight, a silent, sleepless sentinel. When she woke gasping from nightmares in those early days, dreams where he tore the baby from her arms, where he locked her in a tower, where he announced their child's betrothal at birth, he would hear her through the walls. He would stand by the door that connected their chambers, his hand pressed to the wood, wanting desperately to comfort her but knowing his presence might make it worse. He would wait until her breathing calmed, until she lit her candle and he could see her shadow moving, safe. Only then would he return to his own sleepless vigil. His second act was a confession. 3 nights after the discovery, he came to her chamber and knocked softly on the door, a courtesy he had never before extended. When she opened it, her eyes wary and tired, he didn't try to enter. He stood on the threshold, a king humbled before his own doorway. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice low and steady, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. "You deserve to know why I became what I became." She hesitated, then stepped back, allowing him entry. She sat in a chair by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her posture guarded. He remained standing, needing the movement, the distance. He told her of his childhood. He painted a picture not with self-pity, but with stark, unvarnished facts. He spoke of a father who saw him as the future of the dynasty, a living embodiment of a bloodline that stretched back 3,000 years. He described the grueling lessons, the relentless training, the constant pressure to be perfect, to be ruthless, to be inhumanly controlled. Sentiment, Kale said, his eyes distant, lost in a memory she could only imagine, was a fatal flaw. "My father once found me weeping over a hound that had died. I was 8 years old. He did not comfort me. He took me to the kennels, pointed to the hound's replacement, and said, 'Everything is replaceable. Your grief is a useless indulgence. A king cannot afford it.' He made me watch as the old hound's body was taken to be burned. He stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder, and every time I tried to look away, he would tighten his grip and say, 'Watch. Remember, this is what attachment costs.'" Elena's hand went to her mouth, a soft gasp of horror. She could see the little boy, standing alone amidst the cold stone, learning the brutal lesson that love was a liability. "When I was 12, I secured my first treaty," Kale continued, his voice a monotone of remembered pain. "I was so proud. I thought finally he would tell me I had done well. He looked at me and said, 'Your usefulness is confirmed. Do not become complacent.' That was all. I asked him once, just once, if he was proud of me. He said, 'Pride is what a father feels for a son. Satisfaction is what a king feels for an heir. Learn the difference.' I learned. I learned that I was not his son. I was his legacy. His tool. his extension. He met her gaze, and the abyss of regret in his eyes was staggering. I learned to be what he wanted. I learned to see people as pieces on a board. Allies, enemies, assets, threats. It was the only way to survive him, the only way to earn even the cold approximation of approval he was capable of giving. When I took the throne after his death, I ruled as he had taught me. I built power, I forged alliances, and I fortified my heart against any weakness. I thought it was strength. I thought I was protecting myself, my kingdom. His voice broke. I never realized I was simply perpetuating his cruelty. I became him. When you asked me about children, when you tried to reach me, I answered with his voice. Irrelevant, satisfactory, the price of power. Those were his words, Elena. I have been speaking with a dead man's voice for so long I forgot I had one of my own. When I spoke of our child as a marriage pact, when I held you and planned political alliances, I was speaking with my father's voice, and I am so sorry that you were the one to hear it. He offered her his deepest wound, the source of the poison that had so nearly destroyed them. He was showing her the man behind the monster, and asking her to believe that man could change. Elena didn't know what to say. Tears ran down her cheeks for the little boy he had been, for the man he had become, for the distance they still had to cross. She simply stood and, after a long moment of hesitation, placed her hand over his heart. It was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, it was witness. I'm sorry that happened to you, she whispered. But, Kale, your father's cruelty cannot be an excuse for your own. You have to choose to be different. Not because of what he did to you, but in spite of it. I know, he said, covering her hand with his own. And I am choosing. Every day, I am choosing. But I need you to see why it is so hard. Why I have to learn a language I was never taught. I am trying, Elena. I will keep trying. She nodded slowly, and when she withdrew her hand, it was not a rejection, it was a boundary. He respected it and left. His third and most significant act took place not in the intimacy of their chambers, but in the cold, imposing grandeur of the Blood Court's council chamber. A week after the discovery, he summoned the High Council, a gathering of ancient, powerful vampires who had advised his family for generations. They were creatures of tradition, their minds as rigid and unchanging as the granite columns that held up the ceiling. Elena was not invited to the council, but he sent for her later that evening and told her himself what had happened. She sat across from him in the small, sunny alcove where they now took their meals, her hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea, and listened as he recounted the scene. I stood before them, Kale said, his voice steady but his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and I let them speak of treaties, of trade, of the ongoing tensions with the Eastern Wolf clans, and then I told them I was dissolving the rights of blood union. The rights? Elena's eyes widened. Those were the cornerstone of vampire nobility. The ancient laws governing arranged marriages, designed to consolidate power and ensure pure bloodlines. They were the very mechanism he had planned to use for his own child, the mechanism that had driven her to plan her escape. Lord Valerius nearly collapsed, Kale said with a grim smile. He rose to his feet and said I couldn't be serious. He said the rights were our strength, that they'd kept the kingdom secure for millennia. That to dissolve them was to invite chaos, to weaken our most powerful houses. What did you say? I told him our most powerful houses have grown complacent and cruel. That they treat their children as property, barter them for land and titles, sacrifice happiness for influence. I told him this is not strength, but rot that has festered at the heart of our court for too long. His eyes met hers, fierce and certain. I told them my heir will not be a part of it, that my heir will be free to choose their own path, to love whom they choose, and so will theirs. I decreed that as of that moment, the rights were abolished, and any union entered into by force or political contract would be considered null and void. I told them love and consent will be the new law of this land, and it was not a debate. Elena felt her breath catch. What did they do? Lord Valerius resigned on the spot. Lord Theron and Lady Morgana followed. 3 council members, gone within the hour. There are rumors of rebellion from the northern houses. Their alliance with us depended on a future marriage pact between our families. Lady Vess pulled me aside after and said I was weakening the throne, that I was letting my personal affairs cloud my judgment, that I would regret this. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I told her that a throne built on the suffering of children deserves to be weak. I told her if they want to rebel, let them come. I will not build my child's future on anyone's suffering, least of all their own. Elena felt a profound shift within her. This was not a private promise whispered in the dark. This was a public revolution. He was not just changing for her, he was changing his entire world for their child. He was tearing down the very systems that had made him, the systems she had feared would trap her baby. He was using his immense power not to control, but to liberate. And he was paying the price for it. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of lost alliances and political instability. This was costing him. You're going to have enemies now, she said quietly. I already had enemies, he replied. Now I have fewer allies. But I have something more important. I have a chance, one chance to prove to you that I mean what I say, that I will choose you and our child over everything else. Even the crown, if it comes to that. That night, for the first time in weeks, she didn't lie awake staring at the ceiling, plotting escape routes in her mind. She left her door unlocked. An hour later, she felt the bed dip as he sat on the edge, careful not to touch her. They didn't speak. He just sat there, a silent presence in the darkness, and she didn't pull away. In the shared silence, something new began to grow. It was not yet trust, but it was the fertile ground from which it might spring. The garden was no longer a wasteland. A single, fragile seed had been sown. The grand, sweeping gesture of changing the law was followed by a period of quiet, painstaking effort. Kale seemed to understand that while the decree had impressed her, it was the small, consistent acts of tenderness that would truly mend the breach between them. The castle, once a place of oppressive silence and lonely grandeur, began to feel different, warmer. He started with her body's changes. 2 weeks after the discovery, she mentioned to Teresa the maid, who had helped with her escape plan and who now watched Kale with wary, protective eyes, that her back had begun to ache constantly. She thought nothing of it. The next morning, she woke to find a cushioned footstool had been placed by every chair in her chambers, and a collection of pillows in varying sizes had appeared on her bed. When she asked Teresa, the maid just smiled and said, His Majesty had them brought in last night. Said something about supporting the lower spine during early pregnancy. He had read about it. He was studying her condition like a military campaign, learning the terrain of her body's changes. The realization made her chest tight. Then came the strawberries. She casually mentioned to Teresa one morning a longing for the sweet, sun-ripened strawberries that grew only on the southern coast, a taste from her human childhood before she'd come to the castle. She thought nothing of it, just a passing comment about a craving. 2 days later, a royal courier, his horse lathered in sweat from a hard ride, arrived with a crate packed carefully in ice. Inside were the most perfect, crimson strawberries she had ever seen, still cold and fresh, their scent filling her chambers with summer. There was no grand presentation, no note claiming credit. The crate was simply delivered to her chambers with instructions for her to enjoy them. When she saw Kale that evening at dinner, he merely asked, "Were they as you remembered?" She had stared at him, a strawberry halfway to her lips, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "They were perfect." He began to join her for meals, not at the head of the impossibly long, formal dining table where they had dined in the early months of their relationship, but at the small, round table he had moved into a sunny alcove overlooking the gardens. He didn't fill the silence with talk of politics or court intrigue. He asked about her day. He asked about the book she was reading. He asked her to tell him stories of her life before she came to the castle, a past he had never before shown any interest in. She spoke haltingly at first, testing him, waiting for the dismissal or the bored look. It never came. She told him of her family's small bookshop in the human city, of the smell of old paper and ink, of rainy afternoons spent curled in a worn armchair reading novels while her father argued with customers about the merits of various poets. She told him about her mother's herb garden, about learning to bake bread, about the small, ordinary happiness of a life that had seemed unremarkable until she'd lost it. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if committing every word to his vast memory, trying to piece together the woman he was only now beginning to know. "Your father," he said one afternoon, his voice careful. "You said he loved to argue about poetry. What was his favorite?" "Keats," she said, surprised he'd remembered. He had a first edition of the Odes. It was his most prized possession. 3 days later, a package arrived from a rare book dealer in London. Inside was a first edition of Keats' poems, carefully preserved, with a small card in Cale's precise handwriting, for our child's library, so they know where their mother came from. She had wept over that book, holding it to her chest. These were not grand gestures meant to dazzle. They were specific, personal acts of attention. He was learning her, studying her, trying to understand the person he had lived beside for 6 months without truly seeing. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the council meeting, she was in the library, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied a large, ancient map of the kingdom spread across a reading table. She was so absorbed she didn't hear him enter. "Planning your escape again?" he asked softly. The words were light, but his eyes held a flicker of the old hurt, the fear that perhaps all his efforts were not enough, that she would still run. Elena's heart stuttered, but she held his gaze. "No," she said softly, and it was the truth. "I was just wondering where our child might like to play. What parts of the kingdom are safe? Where there are other children, normal families. I don't want them to grow up only knowing this castle." A slow, genuine smile transformed his face, erasing the severe lines of the king and revealing the man beneath. It was the first time she had seen him smile like that, without cynicism or royal condescension, just pure relief and joy. The sight was so startlingly beautiful it made her ache. He came to stand beside her, his finger tracing the mountain ranges and forests depicted on the parchment. "The whispering woods are beautiful in the spring," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The fire lilies bloom and the forest glows at night. I used to go there as a boy, before my father forbade it. He said it was frivolous. But it was the only place I remember being happy." He moved his finger along the map to the western coast. "And here, near Silver Reach, the sand is almost white. The water is warm. Human families vacation there in the summer. We could build a house there, away from the court, a place that's just ours. I can tolerate sunlight with discomfort. Older vampires have more resistance. We could have a sun-shielded room for me, but the rest could be filled with light, windows everywhere. For you and for them." He was offering her the very escape she had planned, but this time he was offering to come with her. He was offering not just to be a father, but to build a family, a home. She felt tears prick her eyes. "You would leave the castle? Live away from court?" "I would live in a cave if it meant you felt safe," he said simply. "The castle is just a building, Elena. You and our child, you are my home now." But there were still hard days. 3 weeks after the discovery, she woke in the middle of the night in a panic. She had dreamed that she'd given birth, and Cale had immediately taken the baby to the throne room to present to the council, and she couldn't follow, couldn't stop him. She woke, gasping, her heart racing, her hand clutched protectively over her small belly. He heard her through the wall. He always heard her, and this time he didn't hesitate. He knocked softly and called, "Elena, may I come in?" She was crying, her face buried in her pillow. "Yes," she choked out. He entered in his sleeping clothes, his hair disheveled, his face creased with worry. He sat on the edge of her bed, careful to maintain distance. "Another nightmare?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Tell me," he said gently. "Tell me what you saw." Through broken sobs, she told him. She told him about the dream, about the fear that still lived in her bones, the terror that one day he would revert, that the king would return and take their child from her. "I know you're trying," she cried. "I see it. But I'm still so afraid, Cale. What if you change your mind? What if when the baby is born, you look at them and see a tool again? What if—" "Elena, stop," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering. "May I?" She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He brought it to his chest, pressed it over where his heart would beat if he were human. "Feel this," he said. "I am cold. I do not breathe as you do. My heart does not beat. I am, in many ways, a dead thing. But I swear to you on every year of my existence, on the throne I have bled for, on the kingdom I have built, I will not fail you again. If I start to slip, if you see the king returning, you tell me, you stop me, and if I cannot be stopped, then you take our child and you run, and I will let you go. I will not hunt you. I will not follow. I love you both too much to be the monster you fear." "You wouldn't try to find us?" she whispered. "I would want to," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Every day, I would want to, but I would not. That is my vow to you. You and our child's safety and happiness matter more than my wants. If I become my father, if I fail to be the man I am trying to become, then you leave, and I let you." It was the most terrifying promise he could make, because it meant giving up control, trusting her judgment over his own. She saw the truth of it in his eyes, and finally, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she moved it from his chest to his face, cupping his cheek. "I don't want to run anymore," she said quietly. "I want to stay. I want to believe in you, but you have to keep showing me, Kale. Every day. Every day," he promised, and he leaned into her touch like a man starved for affection. "For the rest of my existence." The most significant changes happened around her pregnancy. He read every book he could find on human gestation, his ancient mind absorbing medical texts with the same focus he would give a military strategy. He began to anticipate her needs before she voiced them, ginger tea appearing when nausea struck, the temperature of rooms adjusted for her comfort, foods she craved mysteriously appearing in the kitchens. He dismissed her regular physician, a stern, older vampire who treated her like a fragile vessel containing precious cargo and who had made her feel like an incubator rather than a person. He brought in a human midwife from the city, a woman named Anya with kind eyes and gentle hands who spoke to Elena with warmth and respect, who asked about her fears and her hopes, who treated her like a woman bringing a wanted child into the world, but he also made mistakes. One evening, 4 weeks after the discovery, he was discussing the upcoming royal birth with his remaining council members, the ones who hadn't resigned in Elena's presence. He was describing the security measures, the preparations, the announcements that would need to be made. And then he said, almost absently, "The child will need to be presented to the noble houses within a week of birth. It is tradition." Elena had gone very still, very quiet. He didn't notice at first, caught up in the logistics. But then he saw her face, saw the color drain from it, saw her hand creep protectively to her belly. He saw her retreating back into that shell of fear. He stopped mid-sentence. "Leave us." He commanded the council, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. When they were alone, he crossed to her immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. I wasn't thinking. I was falling back into old patterns." "A week old," she said, her voice hollow. "You want to parade our week-old baby in front of the court. Display them like a trophy." "No," he said firmly. "No, that is not what I want. That is what tradition demands. And I am telling you right now, tradition can go to hell. We do not present our child to anyone until we are both ready. If that's a week, a month, a year, or never, it is our choice. I should not have even suggested it without talking to you first." "You said it like it was decided," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Like my opinion didn't matter. Your opinion is the only one that matters," he said, taking her hands in his. "You and our child, no one else. I am sorry, Elena. I am still learning. But you have to tell me when I fail. You have to stop me. Can you do that?" She searched his face, and slowly, she nodded. "I can. But Kale, it scares me when you slip like that. When the king comes back? Then, scare me back into being a man," he said. "Remind me. I give you permission, no. I give you the command to challenge me every time. Be merciless. Our child needs you to be." It was hard, this relearning. But he kept trying. And slowly, week by week, the walls between them continued to crumble. 5 weeks after the discovery, the fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. She watched him, tested him, held a small part of her heart in reserve, waiting for the king to re-emerge, for the coldness to return. But it never did, not completely. He stumbled, yes. He fell back into old patterns, yes. But every time, he caught himself, or she caught him, and he corrected course. One evening, 6 weeks after everything had changed, she was sitting by the fire in her chambers, her hands resting on the small swell of her belly, which was now visible, round and firm beneath her dress. The baby was active, a series of bumps and nudges against her palms. She was 8 weeks along now, and every day the pregnancy became more real, more undeniable. Kale entered the room silently, as was his way, and stood watching her for a long moment. The firelight cast dancing shadows across her face, and she had never looked more beautiful to him, more precious. "May I?" he asked, his voice hesitant. He gestured toward her stomach. Her breath caught. This was a new threshold. He had never asked to touch her like this, to directly connect with the child whose existence had so rocked their world. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum of fear and hope. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. He knelt before her chair, his movements filled with a reverence that stunned her. He was the king of a vast and powerful domain, and he was kneeling at her feet. He slowly raised his hand, his long, cool fingers hovering just above the curve of her belly. He looked at her, his eyes asking for final permission. She nodded again, her throat tight. He pressed his palm against her. His touch was impossibly gentle. For a moment, there was nothing. The baby was still. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, and then, as if sensing its father's presence for the first time, the baby gave a sudden, powerful kick directly into the center of his palm. Kale flinched, not in pain, but in sheer, unadulterated shock. His eyes, wide and luminous in the firelight, shot to hers. "Did you feel that?" he breathed, his voice filled with a childlike wonder that was utterly at odds with the ancient being he was. "I did," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. He didn't remove his hand. He kept it pressed against her, utterly still, his entire being focused on the small, secret world beneath his palm. A tiny foot pushed against him again, a brief, insistent pressure. A low sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, escaped his throat. He lowered his head, resting his forehead against her belly, right beside his hand. "Hello in there," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. "I am your father. And I promise I will not fail you. I will be better than my father was to me. I will love you. I will protect you. But most importantly, I will let you be yourself. Whatever you want to be, whoever you want to love, wherever you want to go, I will support you. You will never be a tool. You will never be a transaction. You will be my child, and you will be loved." In that moment, kneeling on the floor with his head bowed to their unborn child, he was not King Kale, the blood sovereign, the conqueror of the North. He was just a man, awestruck and terrified and overwhelmed by a love so fierce it brought him to his knees. Elena threaded her fingers into his dark hair, the gesture both a comfort and an acceptance. The walls around her heart, so carefully constructed, so fiercely guarded, did not just crack. They crumbled into dust. "I forgive you," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She took his face in both hands and lifted it so he was looking at her. "I forgive you, not because you've earned it, though you have, but because I choose to. Because I want to build our future, not live in our past. Because I love you, the man you were, the man you are, and the man you're becoming, and I want to do this together." He stared at her, his storm-gray eyes bright with tears. "You love me?" She laughed, a watery, joyful sound. "Against all logic and reason, yes. I love you, Kale. Even when you infuriate me, even when you stumble, I love you. And I want to stay. I want us to be a family." He surged up and kissed her then, his hands cupping her face with desperate gentleness. It was not the desperate, possessive kiss of their past, but a slow, tender promise. A kiss that spoke of shared sunrises, of quiet nights, of a future built not on power or duty, but on choice and forgiveness and love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I will spend every day of my existence trying to be worthy of that love," he whispered. "Every single day." "I know," she said, "and I will be here, reminding you when you forget." They were no longer a king and his consort. They were partners, they were a family in the making. And in that quiet, firelit room, with their child nestled between them, they were finally home. The appointment was in the city 3 weeks later, in a clinic run by the human midwife, Anya. Elena was now 11 weeks along, and this would be her first ultrasound. The technology was modern, a stark contrast to the ancient stone and whispered magic of the castle. The clinic was in the human quarter of the city at the base of the mountains, a bustling town where vampires and humans coexisted in an uneasy but functional peace. Elena was nervous. Anya had assured her everything was perfectly normal in their weekly checkups. Elena's vitals were strong, the baby was growing well, the concealment charm's magic had faded right on schedule, and Kale could now hear the second, smaller heartbeat when he held her. But the reality of this final confirmation, of seeing their child for the first time, felt monumental. Kale was a statue of forced composure beside her in the carriage. He had insisted on coming, dismissing the concerns of his security detail about the king venturing into the city's human quarter. He wore simple, dark clothing, no sign of his royal station, though a single guard followed at a discreet distance. But his stillness, his intense, predatory grace, set him apart from everyone else in the bustling streets. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the castle, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. Elena could feel the tension radiating from him. He was trying to be the calm, supportive partner he had been striving to become, but the unfamiliar environment and the weight of the moment were clearly taking their toll. "Elena? The doctor is ready for you," Anya called, her head peeking around the doorframe of the examination room. Kale stood, placing a steadying hand on the small of Elena's back as she rose. His touch was firm, reassuring, but his fingers were ice-cold even through the fabric of her dress. They walked into the small, sterile examination room together. It smelled of antiseptic and clean linen. There was a padded table covered in crisp white paper, and next to it, a machine with a screen and a complex array of buttons and wires. It all felt terribly clinical, a world away from the fire-lit intimacy of the moment he had first felt the baby kick. Anya was gentle and efficient, her cheerful chatter filling the nervous silence as she helped Elena onto the table and instructed her to lift her shirt. The gel she squirted onto Elena's stomach was cold, making her gasp. Kale, standing rigidly by the head of the table, flinched as if he'd felt it too. His hand found hers and gripped it tightly. "All right, let's see what we have here," Anya said, pressing a smooth plastic wand into the gel and moving it across Elena's skin. The screen flickered to life, showing a swirling landscape of gray and black. It was abstract, meaningless to Elena's untrained eye. She held her breath, her gaze darting from the screen to Kale's face. He was staring at the monitor with an expression of such ferocious concentration it was almost painful to watch. He looked like a general studying a battlefield, trying to decipher enemy movements, desperately searching for meaning in the chaos. His hand in hers was trembling. "There," Anya said softly, her voice filled with professional satisfaction. "Right there. See that little flicker?" She pointed to a tiny, pulsing white shape in the center of the screen, no bigger than a bean, and then she flipped a switch. The room was suddenly filled with a sound. A rhythmic, impossibly fast, whooshing beat. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most powerful sound Elena had ever heard. It was the sound of life itself, insistent and strong, a tiny drum beating against the silence of the universe. It was faster than her own heartbeat, faster than anything human, a wild, fierce rhythm that filled the small room. Tears immediately welled in her eyes, spilling over and running down her temples into her hair. This was real. This was their baby's heart. Their child was alive, growing, strong. She turned her head to look at Kale, to share this perfect, miraculous moment with him. And what she saw broke her heart and healed it all at once. His composure had shattered. The king was gone. The warrior was gone. The ancient, immortal being was gone. All that was left was a man, utterly undone. His face, which she had seen express only stoicism, anger, or a carefully controlled passion, was a mask of raw, unfiltered awe. His lips were parted slightly, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the screen, wider than she had ever seen them. The sound of the heartbeat seemed to wash over him, eroding 1,000 years of carefully constructed defenses. His free hand came up to his mouth, covering it as if to hold back the sound that wanted to escape. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a slow path down his sculpted cheek. Then another, and another. He made no sound, no sob, no gasp. He just stood there as silent tears streamed down his face, his body trembling with the force of an emotion too vast to be contained. He was watching the flickering image on the screen, this tiny, indistinct shape, and listening to the fierce, rapid beat of its heart, and he was seeing the future. Not a political alliance, not a strategic asset, not a pawn in a dynastic game. He was seeing his child. A person. A life. A miracle he had nearly thrown away through his own blindness and cruelty. "Kale," Elena whispered, squeezing his hand. He couldn't speak. He tried, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. The tears continued to fall, silent and unstoppable. His other hand released hers and reached toward the screen as if he could touch the tiny, pulsing life displayed there. "That's our baby," Anya said gently, understanding the profundity of the moment. Strong heartbeat, perfect size for 11 weeks. Everything looks wonderful. Elena saw his face crumple. The last of his control gave way. He sank to his knees beside the examination table, his proud shoulders slumping, one hand still gripping Elena's, and the other pressed flat against the table's edge as if he needed it to hold himself upright. He took Elena's hand and pressed it to his wet cheek, his eyes closing as sobs shook his frame silent, racking sobs that came from a place so deep she didn't know it existed in him. The sound of the heartbeat filled the room, a steady, powerful rhythm that seemed to beat in time with his silent, overwhelming grief and his boundless, terrifying joy. Anya, sensing the sacredness of the moment, quietly busied herself on the other side of the room, adjusting equipment and giving them privacy. "It's real?" he whispered, his voice choked and broken. He wasn't speaking to Elena or to Anya, but to himself, to the universe. "It's real. They're real." He opened his eyes and looked up at Elena, and the raw vulnerability there was a testament to how far he had come. "I can hear it," he said, his voice cracking. "Elena, I can hear our baby's heart. It's so fast, so strong. They're alive. They're perfect." "Yes," she whispered back, her own voice thick with emotion. She used her free hand to cup his face, her thumb gently wiping away his tears. "They're perfect, and they're ours." He looked back at the screen, at the tiny flickering image. "I almost lost this," he said, and the anguish in his voice was profound. "I almost lost you both because I was too blind, too cruel, too locked in my father's patterns to see what was right in front of me. His voice broke completely. "I would have spent eternity never knowing them. Never hearing this. How could I have been so blind?" "But you're not blind anymore," Elena said firmly, guiding his face back to hers. "You see us now. You hear us. You chose differently, Kale. You changed. That matters. That's what matters." He shook his head, tears still streaming. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you, or them, or this moment. But I swear to you, Elena, I swear on that heartbeat, I will spend every day of my existence trying to be worthy. I will never stop trying." "I know," she said, and she meant it. She could see it in every tear, every tremor, every broken word. The man who had once seen a child as a tool was on his knees, weeping at the sound of its heart. The king who had ruled with an iron fist was clinging to her hand like a drowning man. He had groveled, he had confessed, he had reformed his entire kingdom. But it was here, in this small, sterile room, brought low by the simple, miraculous sound of a tiny heart, that he had truly, finally proven himself. This was not an act. This was not a strategy. This was a surrender, a complete and total surrender to love. The sound continued, that rapid, insistent thump, 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 filling the room, filling their hearts. Kale stayed on his knees, his head bowed, his hand pressed to Elena's belly now, trying to feel the source of that incredible sound. Anya gave them all the time they needed. Finally, after long minutes, Kale's tears slowed, his breathing steadied. He looked up at Elena with red-rimmed eyes and a watery, incredulous smile. "We're having a baby," he said, as if the reality was just now sinking in. "We're having a baby," she confirmed, laughing through her own tears. "And they're going to be so loved." "So loved," he echoed, "more than anything in any kingdom. I promise." Elena leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead, sealing their new beginning not with a vow, but with a shared and sacred truth. In his surrender, she found her own. The last vestiges of her fear washed away, carried off on the tide of his tears, leaving only a profound and certain peace. The journey back to the castle was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet from the tense silence of the morning. It was a shared, contemplative peace, a silence full of unspoken understanding and new hope. Kale held her hand the entire way, his thumb stroking gentle circles over her knuckles. His eyes, no longer guarded, would frequently drift to her, then to her stomach, and a look of soft wonder would illuminate his features. The world outside the carriage window seemed sharper, the colors more vibrant, as if the miracle they had witnessed had somehow renewed their own senses. When they arrived, he didn't lead her to her chambers or his. Instead, he guided her toward a wing of the castle that had been closed off for centuries, the ancestral nurseries. The air inside was still and thick with the dust of ages. Faded tapestries depicting fables of vampire children and their mythical animal companions hung on the walls, and small, dust-shrouded furniture, a rocking horse with faded paint, a heavy oak cradle carved with the royal crest stood like forgotten ghosts. "This was my nursery," Cale said, his voice soft in the echoing space. "And my father's before me, and his father's before him." Elena ran a hand over the cold, carved wood of the cradle. It was magnificent, a piece of art, but it was also imposing, severe. It looked less like a bed for a baby and more like a miniature throne. She could imagine a long line of royal infants lying here, swaddled in duty from their very first breath, taught from the moment they could comprehend that they were not children, but heirs. This was the room where the cycle of cold, distant parenting began. "It's historic," she said, choosing her word carefully. Cale watched her, reading the apprehension in her face. "Yes," he agreed, "and it is a tomb. A monument to a past we are going to leave behind." He took her hand and led her from the dusty room, closing the heavy doors firmly behind them. "Our child will not sleep here. They will not be raised in the shadow of all these ghosts." He led her further down the corridor to a set of bright, airy rooms she had never seen before. They faced east, and the afternoon sun streamed through huge, newly installed windows, filling the space with warm, golden light. The walls were not cold stone, but plastered and painted a soft, creamy white. The floors were covered in thick, warm rugs. The rooms were still mostly empty, but their potential was clear. This was not a royal nursery designed to produce heirs. This was a home designed to nurture a child. "I had the stonemasons begin work 3 weeks ago," Cale explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Right after the council meeting. I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought we could design it together. Whatever you want. Whatever they will need. This is their space, not the kingdom's." Elena walked to the center of the main room, turning in a slow circle. She could picture it now. A warm, comfortable cradle not of dark, imposing oak, but of light, smooth birch. A soft armchair for late-night feedings and story times. Shelves filled not with dusty tomes on lineage and statecraft, but with colorful books of fairy tales and adventures. A mobile of glittering stars hanging from the ceiling, a chest overflowing with toys. A room filled with light, and laughter, and love. A room where a child could be a child. She turned back to Cale, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "It's perfect," she whispered. He visibly relaxed, a wave of relief washing over him. "There is more," he said, his voice regaining some of its familiar confidence. He led her to the largest window, which looked out not onto the formal, manicured castle grounds, but onto a walled garden she hadn't known existed. It had been overgrown, wild, abandoned for what looked like decades. But now, crews of gardeners were hard at work, clearing away thorns and weeds, tilling the soil, and planting rows of new flowers and small trees. "A private garden," he said, his voice soft with memory. "This was my mother's garden. She died when I was very young, and my father ordered it closed. He said it was frivolous, a waste of space. But I remember it. I remember her taking me here, letting me run through the flowers, teaching me the names of plants. It was the only place I remember being truly happy as a child. I'm reopening it. For them. A place to play where no one from the court can watch or judge, where they can get dirt on their knees and catch butterflies and not worry about being a prince or princess. Where they can just be a child." Elena felt tears prick her eyes again. He was thinking of everything. He was systematically dismantling every single one of her fears and replacing them with beautiful, tangible realities. He was not just erasing the past, he was actively, thoughtfully building a better future. He was giving their child what he had never been given: freedom, safety, joy. He came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his hands spreading protectively over her belly. He rested his chin on her shoulder, and they stood together in silence, watching the sun set over their child's future garden, painting the sky in golds and pinks. "I've been thinking about names," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Have you? His voice was a low rumble against her ear, intimate and warm. If it's a girl, I was thinking of Lyra. After the constellation. For the music in her soul. For the light she'll bring. Lyra, he repeated, testing the sound of it. I like it. It's a name full of light and beauty. Perfect. He paused, his arms tightening around her slightly. And if it is a boy? Elena smiled, leaning back into his embrace. I thought perhaps you should choose. She felt him tense slightly behind her. He was quiet for a long moment, and she knew he was thinking of the long line of severe, dynastic names he carried. Valerius, Cassian, Theron. Names that smelled of iron and old blood. Names that carried the weight of thrones and conquest. Alaric, he said finally, his voice surprisingly gentle. It's an old name. It means ruler of all. But there's a different translation, a human one, that means merciful ruler or noble and kind. I would want him to be merciful, to be kind, to rule his own life with compassion. He tightened his embrace. To be nothing like the kings who came before him, or at least, nothing like the man I was. He will be like the man you are now, she corrected softly, turning in his arms to face him. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the still, solid strength of him beneath her palms. A man who is strong enough to be gentle. A man who is brave enough to be vulnerable. A man who learned to love. A man who changed the world for his child. He looked down at her, his storm-gray eyes clear and full of a deep, unwavering devotion that finally, completely, banished the last of her shadows. The passion they had always shared was still there, a simmering heat beneath the surface, but it was now tempered and deepened by something far more profound: trust, partnership, and a shared, fierce love for the new life that bound them together. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was slow and tender and full of promise. A kiss that spoke of shared sunrises, of quiet nights, of a future built not on power or duty, but on a foundation of choice and forgiveness and hard-won trust. It was the kiss of a king who had discovered his true kingdom was not a land of shadow and stone, but the loving heart of a human woman and the steady, rhythmic beat of their child's heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For giving me another chance. For seeing the man beneath the crown. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it. For staying." "Thank you," she replied. "For changing, for choosing us, for becoming the man I always hoped you could be." They stood there in the golden light of the nursery, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of the garden being brought back to life below them. They were no longer a king and his consort. They were partners. They were a family. And in the warm, sunlit room that held all their future hopes, surrounded by the promise of new life and new beginnings, they were finally, truly home.